And as a child, I grew up in a refugee camp for 3 years, and at one stage come very, very close to death, until in 1978, Australia government take me in as a refugee. It's all right, you can put up with my Australian accent instead. Can I just ask how many people... Very good, huh? How many people here love Vietnamese food? Practically about 1,000 people. And how many of these people, and even if you don't like Vietnamese food, would know a lot about Vietnamese history and culture? Okay, about 5 hands went up out of 1,200. I'm the lucky girl who gets to speak to you about me, and I was lucky enough to survive a war. So what I've done is, I've done something quite different. I have a business called missChu, and it's a Vietnamese fast food brand. This is my refugee visa, which allowed me to enter Australia as a refugee in 1978. And what I've done differently is I've decided to use my logo, or I've decided to use this actual visa as my company logo, and it's quite recognisable in Australia. It's a bit of a famous and probably the best fast food brand in Australia. And the golden rule about TED, don't plug your business, hello. But I have been asked to speak about myself, so I'm a little bit different. And the reason why I've done this is because I really wanted to say to the world, and particularly Australia, that refugees make profound contributions for the positive worldwide. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. It's sad. No one wants to hear a refugee story. I take that. But I'm going to speed through this really quickly, and believe you me, it is far more difficult for me to be standing here telling you about my personal history than it is for you to actually sit there and listen to it. So, I escaped Laos in 1975 because of the Pathet Laos Regime. And they're a little bit like the Viet Cong or the Khmer Rouge. They're hell-bent on killing people. Anyone with education and class had to get out of Laos, particularly in May 1975. We were one of them. The Pathet Lao also committed genocide against the Hmong Hill tribes, and they killed a quarter of the population. As a 5-year-old, I remember crossing the Mekong River. We got caught and we were in prison for 3 months. And during those 3 months, we sustained ourselves on a bowl of rice. We eventually were released, and for the next 3.5 years, I pretty much grew up in a refugee camp. Sorry, this is why you don't hear refugee stories often. But it's important because basically it gives you a context of why the Vietnamese food got to be in the West and why it is going to be a staple diet of the world. Now, life in the camps was squalid and third world at best. Rape, prostitution, drunken and arbitrary killings. It's not really an ideal childhood. Unfortunately, I went through it, I survived it, thank God, and it has informed who I am today. It's definitely made me a stronger person, and has also made me a little bit pissed off as well. Now, a major part of my brand is not simply about delivering the best of Vietnamese food to the Western market. It is also about playing with the identity politics that surrounds the Vietnamese identity in the West. The West has tended to anglicize foreign cultures, getting rid of difficult accents and syllables, sound combinations that don't make sense. My name, for example, is a beautiful Vietnamese name, Chu Thị Mi Hoàng Nga, and the Western version is Nahji Chu. So the process of assimilation is slow. At first, you're just an alien, and then over time, you learn how to adapt. Of course, racism and prejudice exists in all cultures. There is a strange mix of security and isolation that is confronted by the refugee who makes Australia their home, or any other country for that matter. Suddenly, each day is not about day-to-day survival anymore. The refugee knows what it's like to live close to death. We know what a failed state looks like. So these people see menial jobs as a gift, not as a burden. People like me work really hard for security, and because, believe you me, we've come very, very close to losing it all. My personal history in Australia wasn't always assured. I basically walked home from school in the first 5 years with one main aim in my head: don't get bashed up. Really, literally, do not get bashed up. No blood noses today, please. I practically grew up with a baseball bat in my hand for the first 5 years growing up in Australia, and kids used to call me names, all sorts of names. Ching Chong Chinaman, why don't you go back home? I remember I memorized a line I saw in TV once, and it goes, that show, you'd know it, Different Strokes. Your sarcastic insinuations are far too obnoxious to be treated hypothetically by my superior mind. Sure, the kids looked at me strangely. They hated me even more, but at least they left me alone. In 1978, when we first arrived, I couldn't believe what we saw on the supermarket shelves: frozen chickens, tinned fruit, breakfast coming out of cardboard boxes. You know, I was really used to chickens in the backyard, which we slaughtered, and we carried this practice right through into Australia. And the kids used to look at us strangely. Again, they thought that we were witch doctors and were practicing voodoo. They thought that we were weird. In fact, they thought that frozen chickens were actually normal. My auntie's first words when we arrived were, "It'll be fine. All we have to do is feed them." Now, before growing missChu, I had failed in quite a few creative industries, but they've given me the skills in which I now use and have informed me, and these days, these skills have made me a very successful businesswoman. As a young person growing up, I didn't feel that being a Vietnamese woman selling fur not being the coat, fur, and you probably know it as po, or pho, being the Vietnamese noodle soup. But I thought that being a woman selling fur was demeaning, a step backward. I didn't see any of the Vietnamese restaurants growing up that had style, politics, or creativity. So in 2009, with as little as $1,500 in my pocket, I started a business called missChu. 5 years later, I have 8 stores with an annual turnover of over 25 million and growing. I employ about 280 staff, and of these, 60% are Vietnamese and 8% are ex-refugees. Now, with the growth in confidence also came the confidence in creating my political and creative forces behind the brand. And I hope that by the end of this year, I should have about 12. I'm currently building 3 in Australia, and I'm looking for another site in London. I already have one in London. That's why I'm here. Now, street food is fast food, but it is fresh and it forms part of an urban buzz. And I think the Vietnamese culture does this best. We eat the freshest, the most sustainable. We are very good at eating fast and efficiently. And I think this is important for a population that is fast growing and with and where space is becoming a lot more scarce worldwide. So it is my aim to do fast food with soul, with art, and also with a generous serving of politics. I've done no market research in my business planning for missChu. It's pretty much an extension of myself. It is my childhood and every moment since, distilled into a simple food service experience. I think that's why the brand is quite strong. It's real, it's what people want. It's absolutely what it is, it's genuine. Now, introducing street food to the world, I was anything but that submissive and subservient little Vietnamese girl stuck in a Vietnamese enclave. And if anything, I'm a little bit subversive in my approach. One of those things that I do that is a little bit subversive is I've used my refugee visa in all of my stores, and it is basically the wallpaper that you'll see. It's not pop art. By combining various elements of my refugee and school experiences, I realized that the brand was essentially reinventing the moment at which I shifted from being that girl starving in the camp to a girl going to school in the first world, where one had almost killed me and the Australian suburbia almost extinguished my cultural memory. The business both celebrates and satirises the country that has facilitated my success. Now, this slogan, "You ling, we bling," appears on the back of all of my electric bikes, and it shows how I've used the brand to really take ownership as well as have fun with the most common of racial taunts against Asians. And it didn't take until my late 30s to fully realise that a food business could be the vehicle of all of my political opinions and creative passions. Why do I satirise? Well, the racial politics in Australia right now are quite dire and clouded. All Vietnamese refugees who fled the fall of Saigon are referred to classically as boat people, and there were 2 million of us. Not in Australia, don't worry Australia, I mean worldwide. So although I arrived in Australia by plane and through the legal measures, I've made the plight of asylum seekers arriving by boat to Australia as one of the central causes that my brand believes in and supports. And as I said at the beginning of this talk, those who come to the West with nothing are absolutely determined to make something. Here's an example of 3 previous boat people that have arrived in Australia and have made absolutely significant changes for the better in Australia. There are hundreds of people like this, and in fact, there are millions of people like this worldwide. Yet, for over a decade now, the Australian government has chosen to demonise the people who choose to leave their desperate situations and arrive at our shores by boat. They lock them up in detention centres for years on end without a release date. This graph here shows that in 2012, the United Nations, the UNHCR basically, Asylum Trends Report shows that just a little bit over 479,000 claims for asylum were registered across over 44 countries. As you can see, Australia is very much at the bottom of the ladder, and I'm sorry to say, UK, you're not really that far up ahead either. This basically demonstrates that asylum seekers trying to access Australia is not a real issue. Not the way the media and the politicians purport that it is. It is, in fact, a political game, and it is a game I chose to play. So, I have made the demonisation and the mandatory detention of asylum seekers in Australia a central platform of my business, and I sincerely believe that politics should be discussed at the dinner table. I'm one of the refugee ambassadors of Australia. 5% of my profits goes into charities that are close to my heart, most of them being refugee advocacy groups and or art foundations. I've donated more than $250,000 worth of art towards museums and galleries that couldn't have otherwise afforded them so people can enjoy them. I couldn't think of a more exciting thing to do with my money. missChu is a young business, as am I. I'm not a multimillionaire, just yet. But if making substantial profits is not about helping creativity and spread the message about this and or compassion, then for me, it's just not worth doing. I will not get out of bed for it. All of us can contribute to creating a more just, ethical and creative society. The places we visit for food and drink shouldn't just be places of a fantasy escape from reality. They should be places that encourage us to be creative, lead an ethical life and a life of beautiful design. I commissioned a video artist, Lucy McRae, to convey the message that refugees are also capable of high-end art. We worked with the concept and the theme of feeding the mind, a concept I've always found to be of equal importance to feeding the body. So on that note, I humbly thank you all for listening, and I invite you to enjoy a very small snippet of this video that we created.